Welcome everybody to the 20th edition of the Berlin Literature Festival. Due to the pandemic, many of the festival's events take only place online, unfortunately. My name is Stefan Weidner. I'm a German writer, literary critic, and translator from the Arabic. I'm going to talk today via screen to the Pakistani writer, media activist, and developmental economist, Raza Rumi. Raza comes from Lahore in Pakistan, which is a magical city. I visited it several times and it is one of my favorite Oriental cities. A place full of history, monuments, vibrant life, and for sure a lot of smog and other problems. But every city has it. Raza studied abroad in London at the famous London School for Economics. He has held assignments in development and has traveled widely, foremost on the Indian subcontinent. There's a beautiful book by him about Delhi, a Pakistani and Delhi, in Delhi it is called. And I find essays by him on Bangladesh and other places. The focus of our talk today will be his recent book, which is a collection of essays about Pakistani and Indian culture in the broadest sense of the word. This book is called Being Pakistani, and I have it here with me. I can show it to you. This is the book by Raza Rumi we're going to talk about, Being Pakistani. Raza was based in Pakistan until 2014, when the circumstances forced him to leave. He now lives in the East Coast of the United States, where he is with us now. Hello, Raza. Welcome to the Berlin Literature Festival. Hello.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you.
That's great to know. That's really great to know. You have listened to me as I have just tried to introduce you. Please tell us what important aspect I have missed. What you would like to add, and how would you like to describe yourself?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Stefan, for first of all displaying my book. It's nice that you are showing it, but also I'm honored that you read it and it's being featured at this festival. So I don't know what aspect you've covered. You've given a very generous introduction, but I would just add that, I've had a variety of careers and pursuits, and therefore, sometimes even I'm lost when I have to describe myself, because I've been a civil servant in Pakistan. I worked for the Asian Development Bank for nearly a decade as a governance specialist. And then I've been a writer and a journalist. And now, since last 5 years, I'm actually teaching, and I'm a bit of an academic, although I always think I'm, slightly that of an imposter, because I never trained myself to become an academic. But as you mentioned, circumstances and life story landed me. And I'm currently at Ithaca College in upstate New York, where I run a center called Center for Independent Media. And I'm also a visiting faculty at Cornell Institute for Public Affairs. And I'm still connected with Pakistan through the media engagement that I carry out from time to time.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Raza. So let me ask you, if you don't mind, why did you leave Pakistan?
Okay, so that story is a little kind of dire, in the sense that in 2014, I was attacked in Lahore, and a group of the police says that the group of religious extremists tried to assassinate me. They sprayed my car with bullets, and I lost my companion who was driving the car, and there was another person who was severely injured. I was just very lucky. I was very lucky that I was at the back seat and I ducked and survived that attempt. But also, while I'm very grateful that I live, but you live with a kind of guilt and the burden of that whole incident, especially when another precious life was gone. So I was there after this attack for a couple of weeks, and then my sisters live here in the US, so I have family here, and I thought I would come for some time. And as the story of an immigrant is usually, that I came here and then I sort of stayed on. And now I live here mostly. But I do travel to Pakistan now. Of late, I've started doing that.
Thank you very much for this insight, which is a painful insight. Thank you. Having been in the States for so long now, for more than 5 years, what does it mean to you to be, well, kind of in exile? How do you feel something like the famous German word Heimweh, what we call Heimweh, and it translates like yearning for your home country, and if you do so, can you introduce Pakistan to us in terms of what you miss most now?
Yeah. So sure. Yeah, I'm familiar with that German word. It's one of my favorite words, actually. It's certainly, and it's actually 6 years now, more than 6 years that I left, and I chose this path. Perhaps events pushed me away because I have lived earlier abroad, but I always came back to Pakistan. I went for my studies, as you mentioned. I was in the UK for 4 years. Then I worked in Kosovo as well as a UN peacekeeper for a few years. Then I came back again. I was with the Asian Development Bank. I lived in the Philippines for many years, and then I returned again. But this time it has been different because it's this time the reality has dawned upon me that perhaps this is a new home I'm trying to locate. But that's what happens with the lives of migrants and immigrants, that you are too foreign for the place where you live, and you are too foreign if you go back
Oh,
home.
yes.
So it's in that in between liminal stage that you have to negotiate constantly, and your mind and your mind and your soul and your body live in different time zones and different parts of your existence. So part of me still lives in Pakistan, not physically, and physically I'm here, and a part of me lives here. So it is a curious process, to put it mildly. But what I miss the most about Pakistan, well, of course, I mean, I this book of essays that you earlier displayed is partly I compiled it and added a few new things to it. Mainly, it was like my own tribute and my own journey or discovery of Pakistani identity, which is, I believe, identity always is contested. There is no singular definition of any country's identity or any national's identity. But here, I thought that I need to explore the identity through culture, through arts, through literature, through folklore. And that's what I actually miss the most. I miss the conversations, and I miss the intellectual environment that I am rooted in. And so I try and recreate that and reclaim that while trying to learn more about the US and engage with the US through my work, my teaching, my other work that I carry out here. So, but I mean, at the end of the day, I also believe that these identities and that the nation states want you to adhere to. Here's the border, here's your country, and this is your patriotic frame. And if you're out of that, you are not patriotic enough, or you're not a national in the truest sense. So I'm also increasingly rejecting that, because I believe that we can be citizens of many places, we can belong to many places, and that belonging is perhaps I do miss about Pakistan.
Thank you very much. Yes, I can completely understand what you said. Just an hour ago, I spoke to another writer, the Egyptian writer Ala Al-Aswani, who had to leave Egypt for New York now. He lives in New York, and he told me about the same experience. And he said that, well, New York is like at least a third, if not a half, of the inhabitants of New York come from another country. So the idea of being a foreigner doesn't really exist, And so everybody being a foreigner, there is no foreigner anymore, which is a very nice concept. I like it a lot. When we prepared our talk for today, you told me that you are about to write a new book about this experience, being away from Pakistan, being in another country, being kind of in an exile, but still accommodating well, and so on. Can you tell us a bit more about this project?
Yes, so I started actually writing my memoirs, and everybody was saying, "Are you that old? Are you going to die that you're working on a memoir?" But I actually wanted to explore the literary device of memoir, through my own experiences and the journeys and the transitions that I have made in my life. So when I moved to the US, I was already, I'd crossed the 40 years mark. And obviously, if I had moved maybe in my 20s or 30s, it would have been somewhat easier. But doing that when you are very kind of rooted in your home country, and you leave it, you make a choice. I mean, circumstances may whatever be. Of course they were dire in my case, and I was worried. I mean, I was mostly worried about my children. I have two kids who were young then. Now they've grown up. So I was worried about them, that something may come in their way or harm's way. And the fact that because of, on my account, another person lost his life was a guilt and a burden that I thought I just cannot bear, because if it were to repeat itself, I would just not be able to cope with it. But although I have to say that, when I look at my story, it pales into comparison with the millions and millions of people who have been uprooted in recent decades due to war, conflict, or other factors. Look at Syria, what is happening, and Germany has hosted so many hundreds of thousands of them, or other parts of the world. So, they have been through much worse. I mean, I'm still speaking from a position of privilege. And that adds another layer of guilt, that you're privileged and yet you're complaining and moaning. I had my family here. I came in, within a year or so I'd found work, and I didn't have to go through that migrant toil of and I knew the English language, so, which was an advantage. A lot of migrants don't even know. I mean, in the case of Germany, I read all the reports, or other parts. So that privilege. So I'm trying to explore some of these nuances in my writing that I'm working on. That the whole process of leaving and then moving here. And the other thing is that in Pakistan or in many developing countries, when you live there, you have this image of the US as this bastion of democracy and freedom, and the First Amendment and the US Constitution and all the human rights claptrap. And then when you start living here, because the year I moved here, the major riots, actually that's a wrong word, major uprisings and against police violence in the US broke out in the case of Ferguson, where once again a young black persons are attacked and killed, and cities were protesting, and the Black Lives Matter came up, and I started learning more and more about the issue of race and racial inequality here. So I want to document about that, my own experience, because I was a critic of such things in my home country. Inequality, extremism, class divisions, etc. And they're far more intense here. And then, the whole story of Native Americans, which I had never, which you had, of course, read. But when you come here, you talk to people and you read more about it, and you see they're nowhere. They're invisible. So you go to a shopping center, you go to a big city, you will see more foreigners, as you said, in New York. Very rarely you come across Native Americans who are inhabitants of this land. So their whole erasure, and then they have been pushed into reservations, where they live in the US, but they live in their own bubbles. So these are the stories that fascinated me, and that also kind of provided me a continuity to what I had left. and what I was dealing with now and understanding now and engaging. And so, it becomes very difficult to reconcile these things, because if you have a bit of a conscience, and you see that minorities or disadvantaged or underprivileged people are going through this type of exclusion, or this kind of violence, it is very difficult to accept that. And then you think, did I make the right choice? And then we also know, finally, I don't want to harp too much on it, but this whole debate on Islamophobia and all the policies, the rising tide of anti-Muslim, anti-Islam narratives in public domain, in media, in popular writing, in popular imagination, through these big tech companies like Facebook, or Google for that matter. You type the word Muslim or Islam, and all you have is like this complete demonization coming up. Now, I was a critic of Islamic extremism. I mean, one of the reasons the extremists came for me, because they thought I was an infidel, or I was not a
You're a
good
victim
Muslim.
of Islamism. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a victim of
Yes.
it. But here, I'm undergoing a reversal of my position, and for me, intellectually, that is very difficult to deal with. Where do I stand?
Yes.
How do I tread that line? So,
Yes.
so some of these
Yes.
themes I want to carry out in a kind of a personal narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating to listen to you telling us all this, and I'm very much looking forward to this book. And it's very important, because usually you have this binary idea about Islam: be against it or be with it. But to have the whole experience, being attacked by it, but also being stuck with it, having to defend it, or being part of it, this is something we really need. And in this context, I might ask you another maybe intimate question. Raza Rumi is, of course, only a pen name.
Yes.
It would be indecent. I don't want to do it. I don't want to know your real name, but you can tell us maybe why you choose a pen name at all, and why particularly this pen name? Because if you choose your own name, you have the choice to choose what pleases you, what you like most. So it might tell us something about you if you tell us what is the meaning of this pen name.
Yeah, certainly. That's an interesting question. So, I started. I always wanted to write, and obviously, it took me years to get to it. But when I started writing, I was a civil servant, and later I was an employee of an international development organization. So they have all these rules that you cannot write under your name. I mean, the rule exactly says you
Yes.
will not write under your name. And I said, okay, fine, I
Okay.
won't write under my name, I'll write under a pen name. Now, I spoke to my editor, and we discussed pen names. And in those days, and this is an appropriate time to say this, because I was reading a lot of Rumi, and the translations of his work, because my Persian or Farsi is not that good. It's very elementary. So I had to resort to good translations in English, and in particular, Anne-Marie Schimmel, who's a German scholar of
Yes.
Sufism and mystical Islam, and also a friend of Pakistan. So I was reading and reading and rereading her works, and she's and so I was transported into Anne-Marie Schimmel's inner world, and I have great regard for her scholarship
Wow.
and the universe she creates. And I wish that I had a chance to meet her, but she died, of course, many years ago. So I was reading that, and I was kind of obsessed with Rumi's ideas, and that was also because also I was not very happy with my careers. I had stable jobs, all the stability that civil service brings you, or an international highly paid position with pension and benefits brings you, but my soul felt very unhappy, trapped, and incomplete, And so in Rumi's story, I realized that there was a path of liberating myself from the kind of circumstances which the society had created for me or imposed on me. So Rumi became many things to me, of course, and so I chose Rumi as my based on the the poet, the Sufi poet, and of course a great thinker. Not just a poet. I mean, his Rumi is comparable to, I don't know, Goethe in Germany or Shakespeare in English. I mean, they are better known. And now Rumi is being discovered in the West, especially in the US, with more and more translations, and even in the popular culture, you find Rumi. But there are problems with his translations because they kind of erase or undermine his Muslim identity, because that's kind of in post 9/11 world. It is not too cool to be a Muslim, right? So so that's the basic story.
Yes. Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. I also thank you to have mentioned Annemarie Schimmel, who worked a lot about Pakistan, and whom I met, the old Annemarie Schimmel I met in the late 90s and the early 2000s in Cologne, my home city. Annemarie Schimmel was teaching in Bonn in her late years. And I met her several times, and we became friends. And so I thank you for mentioning Annemarie Schimmel. And Rumi, of course, the idea of Rumi brings me to the idea of Sufism, of Islamic mysticism. And of course, we know, you already mentioned it, you come from Lahore. Lahore is not only a fantastic city, a historical city, has a lot of monuments, it's also a hotspot for Sufism. When I was there, I had a friend who lived in Model Town. This is one of the outskirts, one of the suburbs, the good suburbs. But he became friends with Sufis, and he took me with him to Sufi sessions. He took me with him to graveyards, and they were sitting there smoking maybe a pipe of hashish, I don't know. And that was a wonderful experience. So I'm wondering, if growing up in Lahore, seeing Sufism alive, as a live phenomenon, a very popular phenomenon, did this influence you?
Certainly, it has deeply influenced me, and I happen to come from a family which is very devoted to the Sufis and their shrines and their methods of sort of prayer and worship, and we were inducted into it at a very young age, and it is kind of a little of course it's linked to Islamic worship practices, mainstream practices, but it's also a little bit different, because there's more of a sense of community at these Sufi congregations and Sufi mazars or shrines, we call them. So they left a deep mark, and in fact my initial writings were a lot about Sufi saints of Lahore, particularly Ali Usman Hajweri, or Data Sahab as we call him in Lahore. Data Sahab is like a person, a benefactor, so he's the benefactor, great benefactor of Lahore. And he died in early 11th century in the outskirts of Lahore, and now, but his shrine is now very much part of the densely populated old city. And so he's kind of the patron saint of Lahoris, and not just of Lahoris, but also of other Sufi orders that evolved in South Asia and in India, before 1947, it was all India. And so he was an inspiration, and he also was the author of one of the foremost of texts, a Sufi text called Kashful Majub, or the kind of knowledge of that is hidden or mysterious. Yes, veiled. Yeah. Veil. Thank you.
Yes.
And so so he's from Lahore, and I'm very connected, and that's one of my places. So when I went after 4.5 years, nearly 5 years, back to Pakistan after being in the US, the first place that came to my mind before I met my friends or my colleagues or even relatives was going to that shrine, because that's my marker of my identity. So, and that's what I explored in the book, and in my Delhi book, which you mentioned, Delhi by Heart. I've written in much detail about my personal engagement with the Sufi orders in Pakistan and in India too. Now, as you very rightly said, and thank you, Stefan, for pointing that out, that it is a lived experience which matters here. It is not so much the intellectual engagement with it or ritualistic engagement with it, because a lot of people mix the ritual with the idea of a Sufi connection. So, and that complicates the entire thing. So yes, it is important to understand the intellectual parameters or the prognosis and the genesis of the Sufi orders, but it is the lived experience that matters, and it's very personal. At the same time, it puts you in a sense of community. And as in Being Pakistani, this book that we are talking about today, one of its chapters deals with how these different strands of mysticism influenced, medieval India. How that brought in social movements against the unjust and stratified caste system of India, because the Sufis believe in equality and brotherhood, and their khankas or their how would it call one would call is like a caravan or caravans harai, or a big cafe to put it easily for our viewers here. So where the discrimination on the basis of class, caste, color, creed, faith dissolves. So you are equal. You sit there at the khanka. You could be a billionaire, Bill Gates, and you could be a pauper, an unemployed a person, and you sit in the same line, eating the same food. So it's that whole sociological sort of experience and understanding which you only experience there firsthand, influenced a lot of these, not just a lot of social movements for reform in India, in medieval India, but also amazing poetry, amazing ideas, and it connected different faiths, Muslims with Hindus, and different communities within Hindus, different communities within Muslims, and that became the basis of the coexistence that for nearly 1,000 years, or 900 years, Muslims lived in India with the Hindus and other faiths, and they all lived in relative harmony. Of course, this was medieval world. You didn't have fast communications or railways or road networks, but we don't read a lot about violence, communal violence, that we see now in today's India, or at the time of partition of India in 1947. And something happened with the advent of the British colonialism, which kind of started playing up on these divisions, but faith-based divisions, and some of that informs a lot of these essays that I write. A lot of discussion on what we were before 1947, what we became 1940 after 47, and Pakistan tried to be this Islamic where nationalism was located in Islam, and that had its own impact on popular culture, on poetry, on arts, but I also document, and that is the main purpose of these essays, is all the efforts to resist that imposition of a Unitarian, faith-based nationalist identity on Pakistanis.
Exactly. That's very interesting. We're already very deep. You're very deep into the book. I have to say this. You already explained a lot of things, and in fact, you already answered my next question. So my next question was about the relation, or yes, because there was no Pakistan before 1947. And being Pakistani means being more than Pakistani. This is a funny thing. And you mentioned in your book, in one of the essays, the poetry or the intellectual thing of Kabir. I just looked in my library, and I found some books by Kabir. And of course, Kabir is interesting because he's reclaimed He's from the 16th century. He lived in Varanasi, and his name is, it sounds like a Muslim name, but he's reclaimed by Hindus and Muslim alike. So, and he's a kind of a Sufi, a very popular, very simple man, but writing a very profound kind of poetry. And this is a poetry which can be, I mean, people from Pakistan and from India can connect to this. And so this kind of artificial difference between Pakistan and India is transcended if you go back, if you go deeper into history, into the tradition of the countries. And this is what you do in your book, and which I really love. It's something I love about it, you know. For example, you can say that the Kabirs in Kabir, you have a mixture of Muslim Sufi poetry, like you have in a Rumi, but then you have also the Bhakti tradition of the Hindus, you know, the love poetry, love towards God in the Hindu tradition, which is very, very interesting. Would you like to add something about this?
Yes, I would. Thank you for pointing that out. You know, so as you rightly mentioned, you know, Kabir has both has a Muslim grave, a shrine, and he also has a samadhi, or a place where his ashes were sort of where his dead body was ostensibly or reportedly burnt and kept. So he's an object of devotion for both the communities. But and that's really interesting, and because both claim him as their own, and while his poetry and its message relates to both the faiths and the essence of both the faiths, which is basically love for fellow human beings, sought and practiced through love for the divine. So you know, which is again a theme in also prevalent in the Persian poetry, of which Urdu poetry is a successor, where, you know, the poet, we don't know when the poet is actually addressing God, love for God, or the physical temporal beloved, and they kind of mix, and then a lot of poetry has to deal with the fact that, you know, you can only reach divine love once you start loving human beings, or so, you know, that trains you in the art of loving. You know, that reminds me of Eric Fromm, whose famous book Art of Loving is another favorites of mine. So this is what Kabir was doing. But then I also compared him to, it was very interesting that Kabir, as you said, was from the 16th century, and then there was Bulle Shah, who was a Punjabi Sufi poet, and who was saying almost identical things nearly a century later. Again, anti-caste, anti-division, all for love, anti-establishment, anti-authority, and he's equally revered by all Punjabis, regardless of faith. So Hindu Punjabis, or Sikh Punjabis, or Muslim Punjabis, they all chant his verse. And then there was a Bengali example, Lalon Fakir, who is a much later, I think 18th, 19th, early 19th century, and who was also saying similar things, but he even goes beyond the caste and other differences and rejecting them, but he also rejects gender identities. So he's like, you know, so I think I quoted a line from him that, you know, okay, for a man, it's a circumcision is a mark of faith, you know, in Muslim and Jewish faith. But what is there for women? You know, and he says, why are you creating even identities, gender identities through this? Because at the end of the day, they all are servants of God, or they all have to love each other. So, etc. So I found this really fascinating, that over a period of 400 to 500 years, these ideas are distilling. And again, their poetry is not the kind of well-documented, authentic poetry, let's say, like, I don't know, like Shakespeare's plays, or, you know, the romantic poets stuff. But their poetry is public property. People have added stuff to them. Each century, each region has added more things to it, which some people say are fake, are not real, but it doesn't really matter because it's people's poetry. It's people are owning it, reciting it, building upon it, and so it is very difficult to sift what they may have originally said in the 16th or the 15th century and what I recite in the 21st. So, which is again a living testament at how the oral and folk tradition informs our day-to-day cultural identities, our worldview, and my work. A lot of my writings, journalistic writings or the long essays and some essays in this book, are to reclaim this heritage, to remind people of that is what we are inheritors of. And what have we become today? So after 1947, India and Pakistan have taken this path of, 3 wars. They've built these nukes to destroy each other. God forbid if there was a nuclear accident or some mad leader were to press a button, you would have hundreds of millions of people dying. But it's no longer linked to the region, because with a nuclear war, it's the world which is going to be affected. There'll be a nuclear winter setting in. Agricultural production will go down across the globe. So it's as tragic and awful as that. And I argue that why these poets and these cultural icons and figures of everyday imagination are very important, in this hostile and fractured and communal environment.
Yeah. And I think you managed very well to explain this to us. I was particularly impressed by your mentioning of one writer, a woman writer, of our times, nearly. Of course, the partition between India and Pakistan is a big topic for literature. And you mentioned that. Let's take the short stories by Mantu, which are translated also into German. Let's take Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children. But there are many, many other writers who talk about this too, who are not known very much in the West, or who are not known as much as it should be. And the best example you mentioned seemed to me, and I have to admit, I didn't know her before. Is a woman writer called Qurratul Ain Haidar. And she seems to have been a great novelist and the most popular writer in Pakistan, but also in India, writing in Urdu. And you compare her even with Tolstoy. So this is something magical, and I really want to read her novels, and I also want to read the novels in German. Can you tell us something about her?
Yeah, so thank you for pointing that out. I mean, that's an essay I actually wrote, a longish paper on a seminar that was held in her memory after she had passed away. And basically, Qurratul Ain Haidar had this civilizational consciousness about the Indian subcontinent and beyond. And she was truly a literary genius, and the comparison with Tolstoy, I mean, you can easily compare her to Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Herman Hesse or other big writers who have been globally celebrated. But, and in some ways, her canvas is even broader. So she finished her this magnum opus called Aag Ka Darya, or River of Fire, when she was not even 30. I think she wrote it in her late 20s, and it was published even before she was 30. And this is a novel that goes that looks at the nearly 600 to 700 years of, even more actually, 1,000-year old Indian civilization, and in different eras and in different settings and in different political circumstances, she traces a common characters throughout that novel, right until 1950s, when she was finishing her manuscript. And it's a fascinating narration of not just human condition and all the usual big questions that novels explore. I mean, who are we? What is the purpose of our love or tragedy or betrayal or engagement? But also what is the civilization that we are talking about. And through that, so she takes T.S. Eliot's one of the lines from his poem about the river, which is the river which kind of transcends time and space, and takes human history, shapes its course and form, and she does it through these characters. But she's done many other novels as well, which are equally fascinating and equally engaging. And so I wrote this essay. I mean, I was exploring how come that so she came to Pakistan after 1947. She stayed there for nearly a decade, almost a decade, and then she went to the UK, and then she went back to India. So in that case, she also became a migrant thrice, coming from Pakistan, from India to Pakistan, living in the new state, right? She wrote many short stories about that. Then she moved to the UK, where she was working for the BBC as a journalist and writer. And then from there, she moved back to India. And within India, she also went through the uprootedness, because she came from the Muslim nobility, and both her parents were very distinguished writers and modernists of their times. And she post 1947 and post migration to India, she was also experiencing all that India was experiencing, so she became the symbol of both the Indian identity, Indian Muslim, in the hybrid identity, and she narrates it beautifully. So her work is like the canvas is truly civilizational and huge. And I strongly urge, and one of the tragedies is, as you rightly put, is lack of competent translations. She tried her own, hurried translations, which are not too good, because we are like her devotees. I mean, I was very fortunate to actually meet her twice, and I mentioned that in the essay as well briefly. And in my Delhi book, I've put in a whole chapter on my sort of fanboy moment, because when I read her novel, I was the first time I finished her novel, I was a student in London, and it was summer break, and I had all these books to finish. And I was reading her novel. This was, I think I was 20 years old, yeah, or 19. And I was sitting in the summer, and English summers are very nice. I mean, that's the only nice time in England. Otherwise, it's always raining and grey and dreary. And I was reading her book, and I just felt that I had been completely transported or shifted to another world, another landscape, another cultural idiom, because she also deals with the complexities of Urdu and Hindi language, the different dialects, the different communities. There's an Anglo-Indian community that she keeps on referring to, the Zoroastrians in India, the Hindus, the Sikhs, the Muslims, all the diversity of India. She always, her writings capture that and encapsulate that. And I remember that experience, that it was like true true induction into high literature. And since then, for the next 10 years, I did nothing but to read everything that she had written about. So hence my engagement.
Wow, this is a beautiful story, and I hope so strongly that this encourages a big publisher, be it in Germany, be it in the UK or the US, to publish her novels, because we want to experience the same, we want to have the same experience you had. It's so convincing. I feel like I could continue this with you another 2 hours, and we wouldn't even touch upon all of the topics you mentioned here. But let me finish with a topic which preoccupies us all as we are here around the world, and which is the reason why we cannot meet in person but meet via screen, which is at least some kind of equivalent, but of course it's not the same. So my question is, it's to you as a cultural critic and as a homme de lettres, as a man of literature. but it's also a question to you as an essayist and also as an economist and somebody who has worked in development. So first of all, what is the situation in Pakistan about the pandemic? We don't hear much about it. Everybody talks about Europe or about China or the US, but Pakistan, we don't know how the situation is. And we are worried, of course. And then what do you expect from all this? Will there come something good out of it? Because, of course, it means a change, but what change?
Yes, thank you. I think on the first is that initially when the pandemic broke out and was affecting the entire globe, Pakistan was also saw an increase in number of cases. But mercifully, I think it has to do with the young population in Pakistan. The median age is 23, and a variety of other factors, maybe some level of immunity, and the government took steps. They were slightly late, but they closed down, public congregations and other places. So somehow Pakistan has managed to keep the number of deaths and number of infections very low. So that's the good news from Pakistan. But with the second wave coming, you never know what happens. But so far, it's one of the rare success stories like Vietnam and like other South Korea and other places where the pandemic did not hit as much as it did in, let's say, Italy or Spain or Iran or the US, where I am, where so many people are dead now. But what will happen? I think history tells us that after every big pandemic, the world was not the same. So the Spanish flu was followed by the Great Depression in the early 20th century, and we are already seeing signs of a global depression. But what has happened, the good thing that has happened is that the role of government, the role of state in providing health and security and safety for the publics is back with a bang. Even in a capitalist country like the US, they are putting in trillions of dollars, realizing that it is government that owes responsibility. Despite whatever the free marketers and the neoliberal economists say, the government cannot escape the responsibility. And perhaps it is also a rude reminder to the world that it is far more important to have better public health systems, safety of communities, than building nuclear missiles and tanks and spending billions and trillions on defense expenditure. And I think that has been the biggest lesson of this pandemic. And in the US, it's also now slowly dawning upon the public that how a large number of population has been excluded from healthcare, and how they have suffered on that account, where I think at least 40 to 60 million people just don't have medical insurance, or have insurance which does not get them adequate treatment, and if you're out of that, you just die in a pandemic. So I think that has been at a political level, perhaps that's the biggest lesson. But I do feel that the world is going to be a different place, perhaps not as too stark or not as too dramatic as some people are predicting, but certainly the status quo has been challenged and hit by this virus, which perhaps otherwise may not have been.
Thank you so much. That sounds very plausible, very convincing to me, what you say. Yeah, we could continue for a long time, for hours, and it would be a pleasure to sit with you in the restaurant now, having a glass of tea or wine, whatever you prefer, and continue our talk together with some people of the audience who would like to join us. I hope we can have this opportunity any other year, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 3 years. Thank you very much, Raza. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you. Thanks to the audience for listening to us, for watching us, and hope to meet you in person sooner or later.